Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the second in a series of webinars brought to you by the Advisors Collective. My name is Suyen, and in the next 60 minutes, I'm excited to be leading a conversation on a topic that we really need to rethink: recruitment and motivation. For those of you who are new to the Advisors Collective, let me just tell you a little bit about who we are and what we're up to. We are a network of independent boutique consulting firms, each led by senior experts with proven track records at top global consultancies. And so let me introduce a couple of them to you. Eugene Go is the co-founder of TalentKraft, strategy consultancy that helps clients build effective teams, focusing on talent attraction and retention. Prior to joining TalentKraft, Eugene worked at the Singapore Civil Service, Boston Consulting Group, and a number of startups. Apart from Southeast Asia, he has lived and worked in the UK, Norway, UAE, and the US. Now, something you may not know about Eugene, he loves trivia and even once appeared on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Welcome, Eugene. Then second, I'd like to introduce Fermin, who has more than 35 years of experience in HR, which includes consulting, corporate, and academic roles in 40 countries in all continents. He currently sits on the board of directors and chairs the assessment committee of the Institute for Human Resource Professionals here in Singapore, and serves on the HR committee of the National University Health Services Group. He has co-authored 3 books on strategic human resources, remuneration, and HR analytics. He also serves as an adjunct faculty at Singapore Management University and Nanyang Technological University. Little known factoid, he owns nearly 4,000 vinyl records and continues to listen to them all. As for myself, I provide solutions that enable organizations and leaders to reinvent themselves, and I help companies navigate the intersection of technology, strategy, and leadership. I serve as an independent director on the boards of several public, private, and not-for-profit organizations, and I'm a professional speaker. What you may not know about me is that I can lick my elbow. Okay, some of you are trying this now. Okay, so the pandemic has changed the way we work. I guess the question really is, how much of this is going to stick? What changes to the way we manage talent should remain and what should not? In Singapore, the 8-week COVID-19 circuit breaker shutdown comes to an end today. Some people are heading into the office, but businesses are required to continue working from home as much as possible. So today we will be talking about how to hire effectively without ever meeting candidates, because you may not be able to meet them physically, to how to leverage the pandemic to really reinvent recruitment, and finally how to manage a workforce that is both remote and in the office. With that as context, let me now turn the stage over to Eugene, who will kick us off. So Eugene, over to you.
Thanks, Suyen. So for us, what we see with our clients is that at the start of the pandemic and being forced to work from home or work remotely, there was a bit of a scramble to figure out how they're going to continue recruiting, interviewing, hiring, and then actually onboarding candidates. And we see that this is a trend that is going to continue for quite a long time, because at least in Singapore, it's probably several more months before most of us will be back in the office. So consulting, even though we think of ourselves as very important, we don't qualify as an essential service. So there's a longer term question of how do we continue to hire if we are not able to meet people in the office? And a related question is actually, can we use this to our advantage? Is this, in fact, an opportunity for us to change some of the long-standing practices that people used to say we have to do things this way, but actually we don't? So we look at the recruiting process all the way from attracting, selecting, to motivating and retaining talent, and ask ourselves, what are some of the things that we expect to change as a result of the pandemic and the after effects of the pandemic? And by the way, I should say upfront that I'm slightly pessimistic on the likelihood of return to full normality in the next 12, even 18, even 24 months. We will not be in a full lockdown for that long a period, but we will also unlikely to go back to a full situation where everyone works in the office, we have lunch together, we have drinks or other social events in large groups. So I, for one, think that the different mode of working is here to stay for quite a long time. So what needs to change, or what do we need to think about when we are trying to hire and onboard talent in this new environment? So who we try to hire, right? So defining the targets that you want to hire and targeting and sourcing them I think one of the big differences is to ask yourself, if we are working in a new way, do the qualities that we look for in high-performing talent differ? Right? Is it now more important that they are able to work independently rather than in a team? Is it more important that they have this kind of high level of conscientiousness so they can work even if you're not supervising them physically, right? So to some extent, there might be a change in the qualities that you look for when you're trying to attract talent. I think the big change is in the selection process, right? So many companies that we speak to, even now, are still reeling from the shock of not being able to do face-to-face interviews. And they ask, okay, how do I then find the right people for my company? We think that there's actually a huge opportunity here to finally adopt some of the HR screening technologies that have been around for quite a long time, but have not really been leveraged to the full extent because people were just too comfortable with the face-to-face interview. So when it comes to using screening tools to improve the hiring process, there are everything that range from looking at personality and cultural fit to looking at skills, both hard skills like coding or even soft skills like business skills or communication skills. So there are tools that are available to already help you do this filtering process in a very efficient way, very objective way, and often very sort of light touch, right? You don't need to spend a lot of time using these tools. So we think that screening is going to improve because people are forced to do it. So even something as simple as video interviews have been around for years. A lot of people resisted because they wanted to do face-to-face. There's now a chance for you to leverage these technologies in a more significant way. I think interviewing also needs to change. So online interview is not just a simple matter of, all right, guys, do your interview as you've always done it, now just via Zoom. I think there's a need for a lot more discipline within the company to make sure that the interviewers understand the process, have already thought through the structure, or in fact, there's a common structure across the organization. What questions are you asking? How long will the interview last? So much less of that winging it kind of, I just walk in and let my personal charm do the job kind of thing, right? So being much more structured in the process and sensitizing your interviewers to the specific challenges around online interviewing. So like, where do you look? Who do you talk to? How do you deal with glitches when there's a bit of a delay? So there's a slightly different way of interviewing if you are going to be doing it primarily online versus the old face-to-face. So it's not just a simple matter of, I set up an interview, I just do it on Zoom instead of meeting the person face-to-face. So I think selection is where a lot of the change will come from. But I also want to highlight the importance of onboarding people in a good way, right? So a lot of research says the first 30 days, the first 90 days makes a very big impact on the likelihood of someone staying in your company in the longer term. So how well they are introduced to the firm, way of working, the culture, all of that is very, very important foundation for their long-term career prospects. So again, the question here is, it is not just a matter of, we used to do the induction in the conference room on the first day, now we just set up a Zoom and just talk them through all the same stuff, right? There's again a question of how do you use technology to make the process even better? Some of it like automating and simplifying some of the processes, but also at the same time being very conscious of what you have lost when you've gone from the office environment to a work from home environment and making sure that you supplement that. So what the new hires typically say, they don't know their colleagues, they feel more insecure because they're new and they're vulnerable. So making sure that you do something even as simple as assigning a buddy to make sure that somebody talks to them, introduce them to the firm, gives them a good sense of how to navigate organization processes. And beyond that, how do you create a sense of community even though we don't see each other face to face? So right now at TalentKraft, we have actually about 10 interns. About 5 of them I've never met. So, literally I don't know how tall they are. All I've seen is them sitting down like this. So being even more deliberate about organizing events to get people to interact in a social way, right? So we often do a Tuesday lunch, just sit around, no talking about work. Whoever is not slurping noodles at the moment, talk a little bit and share some information. We do things like online games. We created an amazing race for the team to do some puzzles and do some geo search kind of thing. We also do like training where each member of the team trains the rest on a topic that they are familiar with. We've tried very hard to create that kind of opportunities for the team to bond, because I think the key takeaway is a lot of things that used to be done by gut feel or by intuition now need to be much more deliberate, much more thought through. Right? And at the same time, asking yourself, are there tools out there that can make things better? not just translate things that we used to do online, but actually make the whole experience better. So that's what we see as the trends in hiring and also onboarding of talent contactlessly in this new pandemic age.
Well, you're quite right that, yes, a lot of times recruiting hiring managers rely on their charm, as you rightly put it. Over to you, Fermin. Let's get your perspective now.
Thank you, Suyan, and very interesting, Eugene. I really enjoyed listening to that. So 3 key points that I wanted to talk about motivation, just to keep it simple. I've been seeing and reading a lot of different things from different quarters about what to do, what not to do. And what I've tried to do is distill what we've been doing in our own organization, plus what we've been trying to inform everybody that are our stakeholders as to what could be the way forward. So I've divided it into 3 main topics. One is about managing talent. And the idea for managing talent is, can we figure out what has worked and what hasn't worked during these 2 months? So do you know, from the employee's perspective, what is it that they have been excited about? What is it that they liked about working from home? What is it that they liked about having this period where perhaps they got better acquainted with their families? They were better able to do work-life balance, or maybe not. Maybe they found it disturbing and that there was no division between work and life, and how difficult that became. But it's very important to understand from your own perspective, not just reading what is happening elsewhere, but what is happening with your own team. Because if you've read all the different ones, and I will point to the one that appeared in the Straits Times done by IHRP with Engage Rocket, about 80% of the people are actually quite happy about the way this is going. What would be interesting to know is whether 80% of the managers are happy about the way this is going. But it's important to understand what is it that your specific employees are thinking about. So first thing to do, as soon as everybody is trying to get back to work, is to get a real good fix of the things that you should keep from this circuit breaker, the things that you should discard as quickly as possible from the circuit breaker. But one thing for sure is, do not go to business as usual the way it was back in January, because that will not come back anytime soon, and you shouldn't try to force it, because if you do, you will definitely disenfranchise the folks that have found this to be useful or a good way to work. And therefore, we need to try to find out how do we piggyback on this idea of what has made the organization stronger, or what can continue to make the organization stronger. So one idea is, when you get back to work, is to have maybe like a post-CB, all hands on deck, that we can have a good solid discussion about how do we do this now? Well, how do we work together? How do we hear employees out, and how do we get them involved in this redesign of something that no one has ever done before? You know, what's truly interesting about this is that there is no precedent that we can go to and figure out, well, they did it this way, so I'm going to try that. We are all going to have to carve our own path and figure out what works for us. And yes, we can be looking to the sides for ideas, but in the end, it's going to be you, your managers, your employees, trying to figure out how this is going to work for your company. One thing that I want to stress is, what have employees missed the most from the way it used to be? That is probably what you need to bring back fast. It could be that what they miss the most, by the way, is the chit chat. It's going to sound funny to you because this doesn't sound very productive, but it is a way to create culture. It is a way to ensure that people bond. And perhaps some of the ideas that Eugene is talking about, you need to then think, how are you going to do this in your own company? How are you going to create the chit-chat opportunity online so that people can get to know each other on a personal basis and not just on a work? Maybe that they missed something else, that really what they missed is just being able to have lunch with their colleagues. Then how are you going to work that in? It's important to understand what is it from the employee's point of view that they missed the most, and try to bring that back first. The second point I want to make is about HR policies and HR processes. The most important one, I think, is going to be on KPIs. Can you keep your KPIs? Some businesses are thriving. Some businesses are struggling. Some businesses are business as usual, more or less. So you're going to have to figure this out. But whatever part or whatever way you think your business is going right now, one thing that I believe CB has done to all of us is we are all now working in teams by default. Everything is happening in meetings that are team-based meetings in a way that wasn't necessarily the case before. So what I think has come to the fore is the interconnectedness that we all need to have at work to do our work, and the interconnectedness that we all need to have together to be able to achieve KPIs. What may be the most interesting thing that you may do in terms of policy may be, how are you going to fix the KPIs, not just by lowering the KPIs to meet the new demands, but by changing the KPIs to team KPI, to try to create that team environment that has been elusive for the most part under normal circumstances, but that the current work from home circumstances are making easier to achieve. It also leads to think about training in a different way, not only because now we can do online training and we can do all kinds of different types of training. And it's interesting to see how people, when given the time, once they're done baking, the other thing they want to do is go on to online training. So how can you curate the training in a way that is not just individuals acquiring skills, but teams acquiring collective skills? How do you get more team training going? Because people are obviously hungry for it. And if you can get whatever it is that you think is going to help your business, maybe it's design thinking, maybe it's analytics, maybe it's how to write English better, whatever you think is going to be useful, get whole teams to go through online courses so that you can change culture much faster than you would have if you were just trying to send people one off because the boss is telling you, oh, we don't have time, we can't send everybody to training at once. Well, now you can. You can send to everybody to go to training at once. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that you can leverage the team idea, because one thing that's fairly obvious about CB is that it has become a team environment in spades. Not a return in terms of policy to what it once was, not just a downgrading of what it once was in terms of policy, but a leap forward to what it can be, and what are the policies that you need to basically put in place to support that new culture. Integration being, I think, the key word by addressing different needs of all your different employees. The last part I want to cover is culture, because you will have now much more of a mix of part-time employees, project-based employees, gig employees, and your full-time employees. You will have now a different makeup of your workforce simply by virtue of the fact that you will need different types of people, that you may have furloughed some, that you actually don't want to hire full-time people because you think you can do this on contract. And you now realize that if you're going to hire somebody to work from home, they don't need to be in Singapore. They can be anywhere in the world. And the moment you do that, then you quickly realize that your workforce can be radically different than it is today. But yet you need to figure out how are you going to shape culture. And the shaping of culture is two things. Communication, that has always been true. You need to communicate, and you're going to have to communicate in as many ways as possible. You're going to have to do online town halls. You're going to have to do online meetings. You're also going to have to send all kinds of information to people, film videos so that they can see it on demand. But you also need to build the networking of all of your different type of employees so that you can figure out how to bond your employees by design. We are no longer left to the idea that let's make the pantry the place where people meet, or that we're going to have an open space where people can meet, because we can't have them all there at the same time, and we have social distancing. And by the way, we don't even know what they look like even when they show up at work because they're wearing masks. So we're going to have to bond by design online. And this idea of bonding by design online also goes through how do you put fun back into work. You can't make online work just be about work, because you won't be able to create the nice culture that you want. So you're going to have to build fun into work to be able to do that. So work on engagement, I think this is particularly true. I like the idea of pulse surveys. I like the idea that you can target different groups at different points in time and constantly. And I think time is of the essence in this new normal. We need to be pulsing people weekly, and you don't want to send the same stuff to everybody every week. So maybe you just want to target different groups of people at different times so that you can get a good sense of what's going on, because things are changing so fast that you need this information just as fast.
Lots of food for thought there. And just for our attendees who are joining us from Hong Kong, Australia, Malaysia, lots of other countries, if you heard some acronyms in there, CB is the way we affectionately call lockdown, short for circuit breaker. I'm curious to hear from everyone, how well equipped is your organization to hire candidates contactlessly? I will show you the results. It looks like, to some extent, you can see that 63% of you say that you're moderately well equipped, 27% say extremely, and 10% are saying, oh my goodness, this is really complicated. So Eugene, maybe I'll start with you. What are you seeing in the market and in terms of hiring contactlessly, and how has COVID changed the way we actually look at this?
So I think organizations that we speak to are being forced to hire contactless, right? There's no choice. There's no alternative now. Of course, some of them have stopped hiring, or at least they stopped hiring for the first 6 weeks of the circuit breaker. And now some of them are emerging from hibernation. So they're starting to now figure out the answer to this question. Most of them probably, let's say, like moderately well equipped because they feel like they've put in place enough to make it work. But the question is, are you making it work well? And in fact, are you taking the opportunity to make it better than your old recruiting process? So we do a lot of work on building recruiting process, and we can say with quite high confidence that almost all clients we've spoken to have significant opportunity to improve their process. And now that the pandemic has changed our view of what is possible or acceptable or will never work, now is a time to use this drive-through change, I would say.
Yeah, I guess in many respects, the pandemic has made us think, hey, that wasn't possible, but it really caused us to sort of re-examine our assumptions. And I think that's a great follow-on question here coming in from someone in the audience. Do you find that recruitment criteria or work scope descriptions are not specific or lack clarity? So this is for Eugene.
Well, it's a question if they ever were sufficiently specific or whether they were well set up to begin with. I think most organizations have not yet figured out what the new job descriptions should be. Right, so many roles, even let's say consulting or even the work that we do, have we already figured out what the new role looks like? Some of the things that we used to do and say was very important now won't be. So I think there will be a process where people adjust their work scope, their work processes, and figure out how to get things done in a new way, and then subsequently port this back into the job descriptions and into the requirements that they put out in their job listing. I think it's not surprising that at this moment, it's not very well done. It's either you are in the middle of a transition or you haven't fully thought through what is going to happen in the long term. So, right now the job descriptions are probably a little vague or a little bit out of date even.
Or even worse, you just copy and paste the old job description.
The old one, yeah.
Exactly the same job description when actually the reality is the job has actually changed, right? So effort to actually rethink how the job's going to.
Yeah, and actually just to pick up on the point that Fermin made earlier, right? I think he was saying that we now by force all work in teams. There is a question whether in the long run it will go the other way and we will find ways to do work individually. It's actually things that we used to do sitting in a conference room for 3 hours. We would find a new way to get to the similar answer without having to have that much interpersonal relationship, right? So there's a school of thought that says we will redesign work in a way to reduce that level of interpersonal dependence, just so that it can be still done efficiently if we are forced to work remote. It's not clear, which way it will go, or possibly it will go in both directions at the same time, but definitely work will change and the way we work will change.
Yeah, I mean, both of you touched on sort of essentially the employee experience. And of course, that starts really with the onboarding process. Let's do a quick poll of the people that we have with us here, which is, have you updated your onboarding process for remote working? So with this, I'm going to share the results, and it looks like, almost 50% have partially updated their onboarding processes. And I don't know if everybody has done amazing race as you have, Eugene, but certainly 20%, a good 20% have actually completely updated their onboarding process. However, we still got a good 30% that haven't actually done that. So Eugene, just imagine, right? You've got somebody who is a fresh graduate, right? Started a new job May 1st. And for the foreseeable future, you'll be continuing to work from home. Eugene, what works and what doesn't in terms of onboarding? What are you hearing from your clients?
Again, I guess the main thing is to be very deliberate about it, right? So not just on the fly adapting what you used to do to the new situation. For us, what we focused on was making sure that they understand what we do and how we work, right? So not just the processes and tools, but this is the collaboration style, this is the discussion style. I guess my team will have some feedback that they won't tell me about the way we discuss. But I think being much more deliberate and also using the technology where possible to make the process better. So we haven't done this yet, but one of the things we wanted to try was there's apparently a tool called Do Not Be a Stranger, and it would pair people every week to make them have a 30-minute conversation about non-work issues. So, I mean, I guess if you're an Excel geek, you can randomize pairings and then create like every week just a different pairing so that especially the guys who don't work so closely with
Work
them.
with each other,
Yeah,
right.
so this is possibly recreating a bit of the accidentally joining a group for lunch and then learning about each other kind of situation.
It replaces the bump for coffee in the morning, right? Actually, somebody in the group said they send remote starter packs to their new hires. Great idea as well, right? Okay, I have a final sort of recruiting question here for you, Eugene, which is, what will the main impact of COVID be on the recruiting industry? It's an interesting question. I mean, so of course, you've got companies, and how they've traditionally worked with search firms, recruitment firms. Do you see any impact of COVID and the way they go about their business?
I think in the short term, the concern, at least on the recruiters' side of the house, is that there are a lot of people put their mandates, right? So they stop hiring for a while. I think, to be honest, it will go back. Once people start hiring again, there may not be that much change in the industry in the short term. But I would expect the same trends, the fact that now people are being forced to use technology will eventually start to spread throughout the industry. And the ones who are able to outcompete because they are leveraging technology in a better way would start to outcompete their peers, right? So, for example, using more of these kind of online screening tools. I think the same thing that we said for selection as an employer, the recruiter might now be taking some of that and using some of the same tools that an employer could be using. So using more technology to improve their screening and filtering process.
What I'm hearing you say is that the recruitment industry is likely to be disrupted as well, because their core activity, which how companies are going about this, is the essence of what they do. Terrific. Let's actually hear back from everyone. Fermin talked earlier about what is it that you think people actually like and what they don't like. Curious, what do you think employees have missed the most while working from home? Or maybe what have you missed the most during this period? Please drop your comments in the chat box. And while you're doing that, Fermin, can you give us a perspective of what this looks like from the employee view? Any sort of counterintuitive views on this? Sometimes we think we know, but maybe we don't.
Like I said, it might be that what they miss is the social aspects of work. That what they miss is the ability to connect with people on a personal basis. That what they miss is lunch at Gimmo Market, having some char kway teow and talking about which movie to watch on Netflix tonight. And it could very well be that what they truly miss is human touch. I mean, we all love our families very much, but we are social animals. As much as we continue to do this online and from home, there's probably a large chunk of social life that I think a lot of employees are missing.
Yeah, and
probably the other thing I think people are missing is that ability to also have more unstructured time.
Right.
Just to be able to pop into your boss's office and say, hey, I have this idea, what do you think of it? Which is a lot harder to do when you're doing this online because you have to schedule it and you have to find this. So you're missing a little bit of the spontaneity.
I absolutely agree with that. So I think back in consulting days, a lot of problems were solved just by walking up and down the corridor, finding somebody who doesn't look that busy, and then say, hey, can I borrow a couple of minutes of your time, draw something on the board, and then say, okay, that helped me to think through the problem.
That's really, I think the comments that we're getting on the chat really corroborate. So Brenda says socializing and relationships with colleagues. Karen says, I miss my team physically, even though I talk to them every single day, right? Somebody else saying casual chats in the coffee shop. Maybe the coffee is particularly good. Face-to-face interaction. Mike, missing all the office gossip. Again, that would happen. And that's part of culture. And Rowena says, missing just standing up and yelling a question aloud to my teammate. Exactly the point, Eugene, that you were just making. Missing sharing a laugh. TGIF. Somebody else missing getting out of the house, just being out of the house, right? So there could be a whole range of activities that people miss. But you notice that the commonality here really is around the fact that, humans are social animals at the end of the day. And there is a component of this that, seeing each other over screen, I mean, it's fantastic that, we could be speaking to everyone and sharing our views today in a dozen countries or so, but it's not the same as being together. I want to actually move on to policies and processes, but I want to first ask a question of Fermin. Somebody's written in this question, which is, what are the challenges faced with changing the mindset and culture of management to work with part-timers and freelancers? Or professional services such as consultants?
This is a very good question because I think this one is going to take a few years to play itself out. I think the fact that we're going to move to a more mixed workforce is undeniable. I think this is the way we're headed. And most, if not all companies will find that one of the lessons they will have learned through this period of TB or quarantine is the fact that you can work from home, that you can engage people to work on projects, that they can work off office, and that this is all perfectly possible, doable, and in fact, good business sense. So I think as in everything else, the companies that embrace this reality and not just embrace it, but dive into it and try to figure out how to make it work for them, these are the ones that will have a better time of it, because the future will look like that. Not just because it is possible, but because if we follow the 80% of the people that said they want to work from home, that's exactly what's going to happen. And so I think it'll play itself out in the long term, because as in everything else, employees that want to work for this type of company will find this type of boss to work for. Employees that don't want to work for a traditional boss will eventually leave those companies and go to work somewhere else. Bosses that resist the change will eventually find themselves by the wayside, or at least not promoted any further. So I don't think this is going to be an immediate thing. And you can change mindsets like as well as you can do any other change management. 20% of managers are already saying, let's do it. And there's another 60% of management that is saying, let me see how they're done. Let me read and let me go to a training course that'll teach me how to do it. And there's another 20% of managers say, oh, no. The way it used to be is the right way to do it. That 20% will eventually retire early or just not get promoted anymore. That's my sense. But it'll play out over a few years.
Well, and of course, there's a lot to think about in terms of how we restructure HR processes and policies, which you talked about earlier. And be curious to hear from everyone what you're working on. What new processes and policies are you considering to motivate employees in the new normal? Because this requires sort of wholesale change. It could be around motivation, but it could also be just around how you engage your workforce. It sounds like we're going to need a new way of doing things because, HR policies and processes are not structured to the kinds of things that Fermin you just talked about. Let's take a look and see what your responses are. Fermin, while people are getting their responses, and maybe you could give us a bit of a view of HR is not set up to deal with people who don't all look the same, right? We are pretty good when you sort of say, this person works a full-time schedule and they come into the office at a point in time. But now you're saying, hey, there are 6 different flavors of employees. Does it mean 6 different flavors of processes and policies?
And then maybe a 7th flavor, which is artificial intelligence, RPA, robot that you're going to work next to. So
what do you think are
we may need HR policies for robots as well. What do I think?
What's a better priority?
I think that we're going to have to learn this is a new skill, and it's a new skill that some companies have already embraced because some companies have already learned to work like this. Simple examples. Consulting firms have traditionally worked off office. In my consulting days, we used to have bets who could go the longest without ever showing up at the office. The guy that won hadn't shown up at the office for something like 1 year and 11 months. I made it about 8 months without showing up at my office in New York City. So we're used to it. We were used to working abroad and we're used to that kind of environment. I worked for a semiconductor firm where the research team was in 3 different locations. We had a research team in Romania, a research team in Israel, and a research team in the United States, in Texas, that was complemented by another research team in Japan. And these people all worked on different time zones and they managed to do research together because they had a way to structure the work in a way that... So there are already examples of doing this. What happens is that there are not enough examples of doing this because most other people said, okay, open environment and we're going to get people to mingle and that's how we're going to create culture. Well, guess what? That's not going to happen and it's not going to happen for the next 2 years. So you're going to have to figure out some other way to do it. And my point is that whatever you figure out to do is not going to be a stopgap measure. Whatever you're going to figure out to do will become the new way to work because most people, and that back to my 80% number, most people don't want to go back to the office all the time. Yeah, they will go back to the office to the chit chat and the office gossip and the coffee and that, and then they go back home.
And Grace here has a great point about a process. You talked earlier for a minute about all the work is happening in teams, and she said, new process that they've started is forming work groups and squads to have staff come forward to take on projects that are not part of their primary job. Also to the point, Eugene, about job descriptions, how they change, right? This is part of everyone's career development plan now, post the circuit breaker or quarantine period, is rethinking how work gets done in an organization.
Now, the interesting part of this question, Suyen, is not so much how will managers get used to managing different workforces, is how will companies create a unified and integrated culture made up of people who, by the way, may work part-time for you and part-time for another company. Because the fact that they work for you part-time doesn't mean that they only work for you. They could be working part-time for 2 or 3 or even more companies at the same time. So how do you create a unified culture so that when people are working with you, they know how to behave? They know that this is the way we do things here. That's what's going to be really interesting. And the really successful managers are not just the ones that can sort of do the 3-ring circus of different types of employees, but the ones that can figure out the cohesiveness of these teams, even though it is a 3-ring circus.
I mean, easier said than done, and a great segue into our next poll, which is when you think about some of the employees potentially working from home, some employees partially working from home. So if some people choose to work from home 100%, and if some people, work from home part-time and the rest go to the office, how do you think it's going to affect company culture? So is this complete scale change in terms of the culture, or do you think actually the culture is already in place? It's quite bifurcated, the results coming in. It's not easy to do because you could have, the point that was raised earlier is if people are going to start having more part-time or gig type works, they could spend their life in a couple of different organizations. It looks to me that there's going to be, some degree of change that's going to be affecting culture, which actually means that the way we would go about this, managers really need to think differently about how to think about cultures. Grace here also had a very interesting point. And she says in her leadership team meeting, which is now obviously 100% virtual, they've got a new approach called silent meeting.
The meeting is interesting.
To allow folks who are less vocal, because English is not their first language, to actually annotate on the meeting documents so that their ideas are captured verbally and non-verbally. And this is all part of culture, isn't it?
I think that's actually, it's no different than what we've always discussed in terms of leadership competencies. It's just that now leadership competencies are going to be slightly different. Some of them will be the same, ability to communicate, but some of the nuances are going to be ability to communicate online, ability to communicate in this medium, not just in person or not just through memos. So we're going to have a better understanding of what those competencies mean. Plus, the point I was making earlier that I want to emphasize is this idea that we now have to have culture by design. We can no longer rely on just putting out the value statement of the organization and to talk about it. We are going to have to create culture on purpose. And we're going to have to create opportunities where culture is being created. Because all of this bonding, all of this networking that in the chat seems to be the part that people are missing the most, needs to be rebuilt. And we cannot wait until such time as the vaccine exists and we can all go back to work and forget about this. Partly because it might take some time, but partly because even when the vaccine exists and we all have the possibility to go back to work, many people will choose not to. So we are still going to have to be able to build culture by design. By doing all of these things that we've been talking about, how do we create the social side of work online?
Bottom line, we've been talking about culture. We've been talking about, what you need to do to take care of employees. Shift gears around sort of the business side of things. And this is a question for both of you. Are you finding that your clients are more or less efficient or productive with staff working from home? A pretty important bottom line question, isn't it?
Actually, what I hear, it's a bit of a split. So there are companies that, especially more the startups, they already argue that they are fairly flexible in how they work. People already do work from home. They are kind of well aligned on what needs to be done so that people don't need that much supervision and micromanagement. And those guys seem quite happy. They're like, oh, okay, good. We can reduce rent and we are able to work quite well still. And in fact, it reflects a couple of comments that I was reading in chat. There's also a very sort of traditional mindset. If I don't see you, I assume you're not working. And so those are the companies that are waiting to get everybody back into the office as soon as it is not explicitly illegal to do so. I think that because of the different culture and the different way they've set up work processes, the productivity impact is very different. If your company was built on the premise that we are going to measure you clocking in, clocking out, keeping tabs on what you're doing all through the day, then you set up a company and your mindset in such a way that people work to rule almost, right? Just because they are so used to constantly being monitored. And the moment that goes away, they just switch off in a sense. So I think that whole question of how you've set up your processes, your staff mindset, maybe even the people you've hired and the way you have incentivized or trained them to behave is going to be a huge impact on your productivity outcomes.
Fermin, what about you? What's your sense?
Some businesses inherently are not doing as well. If you're in the F&B business, or still, if you're in a cinema business, there's nothing you can do. So yes, those businesses are probably severely affected. In a good number of cases, it is down to what leadership has, and it is a decision leadership makes as to what's the way forward. In some cases, leadership will be saying, okay, well, let's just ride out the storm. That's one way to look at it. But riding out the storm may usually imply that you're just telling people, just, okay, go home, take it easy. Maybe I'm going to cut your pay. Maybe I'm going to lay off some people. Maybe I'm going to furlough some of you. And I'm waiting until things recover. Those will find that for the most part, there's very little productivity. On the other hand, those that were able to rally the troops around this new circumstance. We have to come in this together. There is a challenge. We are up to it. Let's go. Let's do it. Let's figure this out. Those are probably busier than they were before. I'm going to refer back to that survey that I mentioned from Straits Times. One of the answers one of the questions that they asked in the survey, the question was, do you find yourself working more or less? And the answer is the majority of people find themselves working more rather than less. If you take out the commute time, which no longer exists, what you end up is people are now working longer hours at home than they were working at work. So I think the real answer is people are more productive at home as long as they have leadership that can point them in the right direction and can set the right level of challenge, the right level of achievement, and you have the right team approach to try to get the stuff done.
Yeah, and I just want to bring in a couple of comments here because I do think that the dots connect. So one is a comment from MK basically saying that actually, some of it is that people are fearful for their jobs and they don't know if their organization is going to be around post-COVID, which could also be a motivating factor in that, I'm going to work harder.
But MK, don't let a good crisis go to waste.
And then 3 says, so it may be difficult to notice hardworking employees. And so it's putting extra pressure on them to work even harder and send out more emails to prove that they're actually working and that they're working hard. So the role of leadership in setting the tone is absolutely important, which I think
those are the same employees that stay in the office until after the boss leaves just to prove that they're working harder than the boss. So that's no different. Huh?
Yeah. And by the way, for those who've not yet done so, please feel free to download our free ebook from the Advisors Collective. It's 15 pages of insights from our experts on everything from workforce planning, analytics, employee engagement, recruitment, and so on. You can just pop on the QR code there or take down the link that you see there on the page. So here are my key takeaways from today. We have an opportunity to really reinvent the way we bring talent into organizations. In many ways, this pandemic has really disrupted the way a lot of things happen. So why not recruitment as well? At the same time, as many of you have indicated, we are social creatures, so we need to intentionally create impactful onboarding experiences and relationships between people in order to build the kind of culture that we want. Managing talent has never been a one-size-fits-all affair anyway, and the times ahead are no different. What you need to actually focus on is going to be different for your organization versus someone else. Get the data on what's actually working and what's not working. Make sure you look at those policies and processes are congruent with the steps that you want to take. And then finally, leaders in HR actually need to work really, really hard and creatively to build the kind of culture that you want for your organization moving forward. I'm going to flash a slide with Eugene's, Fermin's, and my contact details in case you'd like to drop us a note or track us down in some way. Thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.